What is the most used man-made material on Earth? You guessed right, it's concrete. Look around. It's everywhere. Sidewalks, driveways, foundations, floors you stand on, and even entire buildings are made out of concrete. So why don't we discuss it more? In each episode of Concrete Logic, we will explore one concrete-related topic with the help from industry professionals that are shaping the future of the trade. We'll talk with suppliers, contractors, architects, engineers, specialists, and even some proponents of competing materials about their views of concrete and their vision of its future. Welcome to another episode of the Concrete Logic podcast. And today I have Simon Tippel with Phoenix Concrete Works, all the way from Alberta, Canada. Simon, thanks for coming on the show today. Before we get started, I'll go through my little spiel that I always go through. But the way this podcast works is it's a value for value podcast. So if you get some value out of this podcast today, there's 3 ways you can help the podcast out. One is don't be selfish. If you learn something from Simon today, share it with a colleague, coworker, somebody in the industry. Second thing is you could go to the concretelogicpodcast.com website, and there's a couple ways you can get a hold of me. There's a contact button on there, which will send me an email, or there's a little microphone in the lower right-hand side of the homepage. You can click on that, and that will leave me a voicemail. You can just talk in there, and it leaves me a message. And what I'm looking for is topic suggestions or guest suggestions for the show. So if I'm overlooking something and you're like listening to the podcast and you're thinking, hey, I wish Seth would interview a certain person or go over a certain topic, that's what I'm looking for. So you can help me out there. And then the last way is on that homepage again on concretelogicpodcast.com, upper right-hand corner, there's a blue button that says donate. So that allows you to send some money my way to help with the cost of the podcast. There's hardware, software, all kinds of costs associated with running a podcast. So it's not free. So any dollar amount you can send over to me is appreciated. And the folks that do donate to the show are listed as a producer for the next episode that is released. So if you go to the show notes on every podcast episode, you'll see down there, there's a list of producers. That's what that is. That's the one that's donated to the show. So with that, Simon, let's talk about what you do for a living. So Simon, can you just share what you do for a living? Because we haven't talked about this on the podcast, and we've done over 80 episodes now, and we haven't talked about what Simon does. Simon, could you share?
We're in the decorative concrete industry, but not the decorative concrete industry that most people are familiar with. So we'll do things like concrete countertops, fire bowls, wall claddings, water features, and stuff that generally gets brought into your house. We do concrete furniture and types of decorative concrete that is a little bit different from stuff that you would see, which would be things like stamped concrete or that type of thing that you will see, or even carved concrete. So that's where we're at.
So you guys compete with, when I think of countertops and stuff, a lot of folks like granite or marble and things like that. Why do you find that people prefer the concrete countertops over those two products?
It's just a different media. I think that a lot of people are tired of pieces that you'll see a lot of quartz countertops, and you'll see a lot of stuff. Everything has that kind of a plastic feel to it, or not necessarily the granites, but people want something that's more authentic. I think people are getting back into stuff that is more artisan or craftsman in style. I think it takes a special kind of person that wants to have concrete in their house, but a lot of the preconceived ideas of concrete is that it's the sidewalk out front or the bridge that you drove over. But we can do so many beautiful things with concrete that it's actually really remarkable, the looks that we can achieve with that. We can do stuff that looks very similar to a natural stone. We can have it look honed or finished so that it resembles a terrazzo floor. We can do things that are making it so it's just a salt and pepper finish like you would have in concrete, or just have the natural raw concrete as a look.
So it sounds like it can be more customized. And if someone said, hey, I want a granite countertop Then you got to go to. I always see those places. I drive by. There's a couple places near where I live, but you drive by and there's just slabs and slabs of the granite laying up there, and people go through there. I don't have granite countertops. Of course, I have concrete countertops, which I've shared with the folks on the show before. And before I hit record, I was sharing with Simon. I was like, I wish I'd talked to you before I did that. I know I'm going to learn something today that could have saved me probably some time and some frustrations. But anyways, so going back to the granite countertops, which are very popular in our area, is there's like slabs of it. And so you got to go and pick a certain color or whatever look that you want. And then they cut it and then bring it out to your house. And it sounds, Simon, that if you guys have a little bit more flexibility, if someone says, hey, I want a certain look in my house, you can actually go in the house and see what the rest of the decorations or whatever. I'm not an interior designer, Simon, so you're going to have to help me out.
You betcha. So in a situation of that, like we're talking about picking a slab, we actually worked with a few customers that they wanted to have veining in there. They looked at a couple of slabs, but they were very specific in what they wanted to have for veining. They wanted to have, they're like, what we'd really like is we'd like to have a piece of sandstone as our countertop. The sandstone is a really weak media, but they like the look of sandstone. So they wanted to have that, but they wanted to have the fissures and the look of sandstone. And our client was like, what would be really cool is if the vein met at the corner of the sink here and then carried on through the other. So like, we couldn't find that in a natural setting if we tried. How many slabs would you have to cut to find a vein that went exactly through where the sink hole was in terms of what you wanted? And then she's like, and I'd really like the other side to look a certain way, and I would love to have a vein pop out of there. We were able to map all that out on the countertop and create those looks to those very specific locations in her kitchen so that she could have the finished look that she wanted. So we can do some stuff that's very precise and not look like it's very precise. We made those look very natural, and it looked pretty much like a sandstone countertop, which would be very impractical. It had all the durability of what we create.
When you start talking about that reminded me, there's some folks I follow on LinkedIn that do casted, like what you do, casted bowls and countertops and things. And what some of the cool stuff that I've seen is, like you said, that you can make concrete look like a different material. Like the thing that popped up in my head when you were talking about that was I've seen guys do concrete that looks like wood. So that it's been stained, it's got the little wood look to it, but it's made out of concrete, which is more resilient to things that would happen in those certain rooms. If it's in a bathroom, it's going to get wet. So you would rather have something concrete get wet versus having a wood in there. Wood doesn't do so well when it gets wet, typically.
We've done several pieces in exactly that fashion so that they resemble wood, and we've even done acid staining, which is another thing that you'll see in a decorative concrete world. I don't do a lot of acid staining, but we did some staining and some dyeing of products to get the look that the person was looking for, so they could have a wood look in order to have it over top of their mantle where they needed to have a fire rating that you couldn't get obviously because they had a wood burning stove, and they wanted that wood look but couldn't get that wood look without compromising their fire rating. So we were able to help them achieve that by making a natural wood look using concrete.
Yeah. I guess to relate to most of our listeners are in the commercial concrete world like I do for a living. But so we were talking a little bit before we hit record about some of the technologies that we both use that overlap. Can you talk a little bit about the type of technologies you use? For instance, what's the different reinforcements you guys use for what you do? How does that work? Maybe talk about a little bit if you use any kind of admixtures or anything that helps you all deliver a product.
Yeah, certainly. So in terms of reinforcement, our primary reinforcement is glass fiber, and the majority of stuff that I create is a GFRC or a glass fiber reinforced concrete. As far as I know, that part of the industry in the commercial world got its start in the skyscraper industry. So they wanted to make wall claddings and stuff that you could adhere to the side of a skyscraper. But they needed to do that in a way that you could cure the concrete, deliver the concrete, and go up and attach and affix that in a short amount of time. And there's not a lot of tensile strength in concrete. Everything in concrete is more or less geared towards your compressive strength. So the way that they got around that is it's not practical to try and put a rebar matrix or a mesh matrix or wire mesh matrix into such a thin panel. So they came up with using alkali resistant glass in order to do that. That's not to say that we don't use rebar or similar types of reinforcement in our concrete. There's occasions where I've used rebar and whatever. Something I hadn't mentioned is in the longer pieces that we do, I've got a couple projects coming up in the summertime here that will be using post-tension. And we can use post-tension, I think you guys abbreviate it to PT in our concrete. So we can use post-tension concrete that is slightly modified from what you might see in the industry in order to do or achieve the looks that we're looking. So we can have, say, a table that spans 12 feet and only have support on two ends if you wanted to do a conference table, or something that's decorative outside a bridge. If you're doing just a bridge and a parkway and you just wanted to have that just craned in, we can do that type of decorative concrete without having to have the massive undertaking that you'd have to do with construction. We could precast a small walk bridge and drop it into place over top of a small creek or something to that effect if we wanted to do that type of concrete. But it's certainly more resilient than people think in terms of what can be done with the decorative side of it.
Yeah. So what's the post tension? Is it obviously it's a much thinner cable than I've used in the past for a structural deck. So is it like, how small is that? How's that work? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I can't say a whole lot because the guys that I'm bound by, hey, we're not supposed to talk about what we learned in a setting. But what we'll do is it's essentially we'll put a piece of rod in the middle. It'll be about a half inch or even a quarter inch thick in the middle of a pipe that's the same diameter on the inside, and then thread that through so we can compress it. So it wouldn't be a cable; it'd be more of a rod or something to that matter, like a high tensile strength rod.
Okay. Huh. And I was sharing with you when I did my concrete countertops that I actually casted them in place, and you were saying that most of your work, like you're explaining now, is precast. And I don't think a whole lot of people understand that you actually cast these things and then bring it to your site where you're installing.
Yes. So what we'll do, go ahead.
I was going to ask you, could you talk about why you do that as far as I assume there's quality control, things that are easier for you to handle when you do the pre-kit, and probably different ways of how you actually mix your concrete. Do you guys call it concrete, by the way?
It's concrete.
All right. I know when I was talking to the UHPC guy, he was like, it's composites. It's not concrete. That's why I mentioned that. So can you talk about why you guys precast versus cast in place typically?
The big things are quality control. Everything in a shop environment, everything that is in my shop environment is much higher control than what we would have in a person's house. We've done a couple small pieces in place where we've done a couple pieces where we've got to do a piece that's around a post that we can't obviously drop the concrete over top of a post. We can't just cut the middle of the post to put that in. Those are the rare instances where we'll do a cast in place. But you've got environmental issues that you might want to take into consideration if you've got other trades coming in and going, because what we're doing is very decorative. If you cast a piece outside, a sidewalk and a cat walk through it, that's concrete on the outside, right? Nobody's going to worry about that. If you had a cat walk through your concrete while that piece was in the house, that might not be acceptable to the homeowner. So you have those environmental controls that you can take into consideration. And the other side of it is I don't like to leave a mess in the client's place. All that mess is relegated to the shop area where I'm working. So if I've got to do any polishing or processing that requires water, or if I'm doing any grinding that's going to create a small amount of dust, that's all contained into my shop environment, and it's not in the client's area.
Do you have any limitations on size when you do it that way?
The largest piece that I've personally cast, and I know a couple of guys who have cast longer pieces than I have, is we did a piece that was 17 and a half feet long, and we were able to deliver that as a 17 and a half foot long single span concrete countertop that was an inch and a quarter thick with two holes that were cut out the middle, or actually cast out. We didn't even cut them out. We just left voids for the sink and for their range, and we were able to bring that in a single span through the door and set it onto their countertop. We can do some really long spans. I know a couple of guys who've done 20 plus feet in a single span piece of concrete.
That's a big piece.
I joke about it with some of the clients. I'm delivering a sidewalk and setting it on your cabinets. There's some monster pieces we've done, monster to us, right? A piece like that might weigh 1,000 pounds, and that's not even your first 3 wheelbarrows off the truck, right? But it's monster, and you consider what we're doing with it.
You're putting it in somebody's kitchen. That's amazing. What do you guys typically put on the counters? Sealer or whatever you put on typically, so folks can use it like any other countertop?
Let's break that down into 2 categories. There's sealers, which is not what I think you did, and there's coatings. So I think that in the way that I think about it is there's 2 different technologies at play here. So a sealer, in my mind, is something that soaks down into the concrete and physically seals the concrete and becomes part of the structure of the concrete. And there is coatings, which essentially go over the top of the concrete and coat it from the top. If you're using a urethane or an acrylic or a polyaspartic or any of those types of things, or an epoxy, those are all coatings that go over the top. And you'll see that a lot and I think that word gets misused in the industry a lot. You can do a beautiful epoxy coating. You can get a beautiful look, and that's great for what you're doing. And it's fine. It works really well. But if you're taking it to the next level in terms of the longevity of the lifespan of the concrete, if you're using a coating in a kitchen and you're using your knives or something and you scratch through that coating, then you have nothing that's actually protecting the concrete itself. Whereas a sealer, the types of things that we're using, they penetrate into the concrete and become part of, and the sealer that I'm using reacts. It's a reactive sealer with different technologies on board that reacts with the concrete to make a glass-like surface on the surface of the concrete and impregnate the concrete. So it's a little bit different, but it gives it. So I don't recommend obviously cutting on top of a countertop or piece, but it will make it so that the piece patinas with age versus having to scrape a coating off and starting again.
Do you have to maintain that sealer over time, or what's the maintenance on something like that?
Typically, it'll last you years and years, depending on abuse and certain circumstances. But it may need a refresher if it's in a high traffic area after 3 to 5 years, depending on how much. And a lot of that is dependent on client care. If a client is, I'll say, abusive of their area, then we might even steer people away from even using us if they're the type of client if I do a client meet and I see that they're the type of person that leaves a spaghetti pot in the sink for 6 weeks on end and pile stuff on top, concrete may not be the best choice for them. In that case, I would recommend, hey, get a plastic countertop or something that if you're not going to maintain or keep your house or business clean, it may not be the best fit for you. But if you're a conscientious, you got to think, right? From a person buying a concrete countertop from us or buying a product from us, it's a significant investment into their space. So typically they're going to want to take care of it. If they're buying a utilitarian worktop, and they're going to mistreat it, then it doesn't make a difference. So we sell it to that kind of aspect, right? We qualify our customers a little bit to say, hey, maybe concrete's good for you, maybe concrete's not good for you. But in a typical situation, it might be 5, 10, 15 years or longer.
You mentioned earlier that you countertops and sink bowls and furniture you've casted for clients. Is there any other type of products that you work on or clients ask for that maybe folks don't know that it's concrete or don't realize that you, like someone like you, would do?
Right now, I'm working with a tiny house builder, Fritz Tiny, and what we're doing for them is on all of their tiny homes right now, we're doing shower panels. So we're doing large format tiles that are made in concrete. I've got a concrete tile that I have to cast after the show here that is going to be 42 square feet. And that 42 square foot countertop will weigh 210 pounds and only be a half-inch thick. So in terms of tile that size, you're looking at 7 by 7 in size. So you're looking at a fairly large tile that, in other concretes, like we're using a very high performance mix, but in street concrete or something, in a half-inch, I don't know that you would even try and cast anything that thin with the concretes that you use. And I will flip that piece 15 hours after I cast it, and I won't worry about breakage or anything like that. It'll be a salt of the earth piece when we're done.
Oh, wow. Wait, the form that you use, is it wood or is it a mold, or what are you using for that project?
So on that particular project, I've got a casting table. So what a casting table is, it can be a number of different things for different people. My casting table is a large flat surface that we made using plywood and wood as the base. And then what I did over the top of was I put an epoxy top, and then we use a release agent so that we can pop it off the top of the epoxy so that we can get it to make those large pieces, and then have a single span where we don't have any seams or joints noticeable. Other casting tables people use, they'll use steel. So you can get large sheets of steel, again, waxing and sealing those and cast on top of that. And for any homeowners or anybody who's listening that wants to try it for themselves, melamine plywood or melamine that you would have like your kitchens are made out of, that melamine surface is a really good surface to cast over the top of if you want to do a cast and then pop it off the surface.
That's what I did. I just popped out the laminate top and used it as the form.
And it works beautifully. Typically on one of those, if you're using a melamine, you don't need to use a release agent. It doesn't stick to concrete. You can cast on top of like poly. You can cast on top of, what is the word for it? Plexiglass.
Oh,
You could cast on top of something like that. And the interesting characteristics about concrete, and depending on what you want, you're going to get a mirror image of whatever you cast over the top of, providing you have a release agent or whatever. So if you were doing a decorative piece on your own or whatever, you could cast over top a piece of glass and it'll have that same sheen on the concrete side as the glass, right? It'll have that shine or whatever. It's not a durable finish because it's a cream finish. But if we talked about those board form earlier where they wanted to have it look like wood, if you cast on wood, it'll look like wood. Just the reverse of whatever you were casting on.
did that piece you're talking about, the project you're working on, that's only a half-inch thick and it's 42 square feet. What is that? The glass you're using glass fibers as reinforcement for that project?
Yeah, I'm using half-inch glass fibers. Typically, that's all I use. I know a lot of guys will use scrim. I don't know if you guys have any idea of what scrim would be. Scrim is a mesh that is applied to the area that you want to have if you need extra reinforcement in a concrete. I won't go too much into detail, but it's another backing. Something that would be similar, you might see it, is scrim, or a version of scrim might be used in stucco. You might see them put it on the wall and go over the top. It's reinforcement on that area, but typically I don't use scrim anymore because the concrete has gotten such good quality or such a high quality in the last couple of years that I don't feel that it's necessary anymore.
Huh. The reinforcement I used for my countertops was a carbon fiber mesh. So it felt like almost like twine almost is the best way I can describe it. A net twine.
Okay.
And then you have to attach it to the chairs. So you put the chairs in the.
Oh, I'm following. Yes. I guess that would be potentially a version of scrim, and you put it's basically, in your situation, it would have been the underside of the countertop almost.
So you put I screwed these plastic chairs in there, and then attached the carbon fiber mesh to that, so it wouldn't float when I was placing the concrete.
Yeah, that would probably be more of a scrim. And in that case, I guess we can talk a little bit about it since you brought it up here. In most cases, you want that on the bottom side of your concrete. So if you were going over a span, that is to help with the tension side of the concrete, right? Typically, if you're doing a span over a certain spot, like if you were spanning two pieces and the force was going from the middle downwards, you want the bottom to have your tension for reinforcement. If you were doing a cantilever, you'd want that piece on the top side so that your piece isn't going to snap off on the other way. If you had a large cantilever in your counter and you had that mesh on the bottom and you had a cantilever, the piece might snap off more unless you had that on the top half of the concrete, if that makes sense.
No, hopefully I did that. I guess time will tell me if I get cracks, right? Well, good. So there's the tile, the shower panel. Is there any other favorites out there that you want to share before we wrap it up today? Any other projects you're working on or past projects that you share?
I know that in certain building applications, a big one for us is we'll do concrete sinks, and we'll do a concrete sink. A lot of our commercial jobs end up being the concrete sinks because they have to be ADA compliant. I don't know I'm pretty sure the ADA compliancy in the United States is the same as they are in Canada. ADA compliancy is your disability accessibility kind of thing. So they have very strict guidelines to what can be produced in terms of accessibility. Typically, they have to be to the very bottom of a sink. You cannot be lower than 29 inches and they cannot be taller than 34 inches. So you have that 5-inch band that they're saying that is the height requirements for a sink. And in a lot of applications, if you go into places, you'll see that's the way that most of those places are. But the creativity that we can do with concrete, we can create like a sink that's 14 feet long, so you can have multiple wash stations at it and make it at least aesthetically pleasing. A lot of those things that you'll see in a lot of those places, if they're not made out of concrete, they're made out of plastic or corian or stainless steel, but they're not really a decorative item. So they're utilitarian. And what we can do is we can create pieces that are much more artisan and eye appealing in those types of cases. We've done a few shower bases, a few bathtubs. There's a lot of places where you can use concrete decoratively that people might not even be aware.
It gives you the flexibility to pretty much come up with what you want. Really, it sounds like, and then you could cast it to whatever the customer really wants instead of having to say, hey, I got this slab of quartz or slab of granite that you got to work with to make it happen, or steel or whatever. I would think you got more flexibility using concrete. And plus, concrete's just cool.
And another thing to consider when you're using concrete, a lot of the pieces, like we're talking about casting fairly thin pieces of concrete, and weight is always as a factor in what people take a look at, but you can do furniture pieces. We're going to be making a couple of chairs coming up, and those chairs are going to be kitchen chairs. So we can do thinner pieces than what people think. A lot of people think that concrete needs to be 4 inches thick or whatever. We can cast some very thin pieces, and the flowability of what we're using for our mix is in such a way that, those 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch type pieces are absolutely possible. And if we can build a mold that the concrete can flow through, we can design some pieces that are mind-bending and there's some artisans out there that are doing some phenomenal stuff with furniture that you wouldn't have dreamed of doing even 5 or 6 years ago, because the media has gotten to a point where if you can imagine it, you can probably cast it.
Yes, there's some cool stuff out there. Definitely. I think this is a good spot to pause today, Simon. If folks want to reach out to you and learn more about what you're doing, it sounds like you're on the cutting edge of some of this stuff. So there might be some listeners out there that want to learn more. What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Because we're up in Canada, probably the easiest way for most of your listeners is just to reach out and find us on Instagram. We're at Phoenix Concrete Works. On Instagram is probably the easiest place that you'll be able to find me. Or you can reach out by email, and that's simon@phoenixconcreteworks.com.
That's great. And we'll put all Simon's contact information in the show notes so folks can find it there as well. And then Simon's podcast will have its own page on the website, so you'll want to check that out. All right, Simon, appreciate you coming on the show, everybody. Until next time, let's keep it concrete. And that concludes another episode of the Concrete Logic Podcast. I hope you got some value out of that episode and learned a thing or two. If you did, visit our website, concretelogicpodcast.com. Click on the Show Support tab and learn how you could be listed as a producer of an episode. Again, that's concretelogicpodcast.com. Click on Show Support tab to learn how you can support the show. And as always, Mike Dunton will take us out.
Ring, ring, that alarm always sings. Couple hours before the sun comes up. Open up the side, put some diesel in the lights, and wait till the trucks roll up. Yeah, this ain't how most folks live their lives. Dripping in sweat, working overtime. But while they're tying their ties for their 9 to 5s, we're out here changing these skylines with wood, iron, and mud. We work hard for $1, give thanks to the Lord above. Never make a man do something you can't prove. Hard work calls for a drink or two. Expect more, it's written in our blood. With wood, iron, and mud. From the swamps to the city, from the Lone Star heat to the woods of the Georgia pine. Good old boys and girls who ain't afraid of getting dirty for a clean dime. And if you want to see the fire in a grown man's eyes beneath the hot summer sun, find the wild-eyed boys clocking days and nights, working hard to get that job done with wood, iron, and mud. We work hard for $1, give thanks to the Lord above. The color of our collars ain't white or blue. We're all gray collar through and through. Expect more, it's written in our blood. With wood, iron, and mud. Something you can't prove. Hard work calls for a drink or two. Expect more, it's written